a few months to go before the calendar would turn 2000, as a revived syncretic subculture was going haywire about what this event of Roman timekeeping might just mean. A book was published from within the field of alternative Egyptology that somewhat deviated from the narrative put forward in the bestsellers of the new renegades and the pyramid idiots that had conquered much of the 90s to gradually build up the craze. It was called The Stargate Conspiracy, and the authors Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince tells us in the intro to the book that, quote, as non-academics researching ancient Egypt, we could not remain unaware of the upsurge of interest in the alternative Egypt of Andrew Collins, Colin Wilson, and others, whose books challenged the often rather complacent certainties of mainstream Egyptology. Above all, three authors have become associated in the public mind with radical new ideas about ancient cultures, particularly Egypt. Robert Temple, author of the seminal The Serious Mystery from 1976. Robert Bauval, co-author with Adrian Gilbert of the Orion Mystery, 1994. And Graham Hancock, whose runaway success was established with The Sign and the Seal in 92. Since then, Hancock has gone on to entrance huge audiences worldwide with Fingerprints of the Gods in 95, and with his wife Santa Faya, Heaven's Mirror 98, and also collaborating with Robert Bauval to produce Keeper of Genesis in 96, and together with John Grisby, The Mars Mystery 98. These books encompass a vast range of fascinating and radical new ideas, many of which have now become so entrenched among their readers as to be accepted as hard fact. And, like most of their readers, we too began as enthralled admirers. After many months of researching and writing this book, we still admired those authors' energy and commitment. But as we stood back from their work, we have perceived a new and considerably larger pattern taking shape. Whether or not those authors are aware of it, their work forms an intrinsic part of what amounts to an orchestrated campaign. And the matter does not end there. The bitter controversy surrounding the idea of a long-dead civilization on Mars has also been absorbed into this campaign, and, like the mysteries of Egypt, has been pressed into service to present a carefully stage-managed message. Essentially, it proposes that the ancient gods were extraterrestrials, and they're back. But the subtext is very clever. Only certain chosen people hear their words, and only certain chosen people will be part of the revelations to come. We can hazard a guess at the identity of some of the chosen, but the others may be rather surprising. Cynically exploiting our end-of-the-century hunger for signs and wonders and our ongoing love affair with the mysteries of ancient Egypt, the conspirators are in the process of creating a massive, insidious belief system that feeds on millennium fever, though perhaps not blossoming properly until the very first years of the 21st century.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Okay. So, yes. So Reid, you said you read a little bit about Robert Temple's The Serious Mystery. Personally, I only being a 90s kid, I only got it from Hancock and Bauval and the others of like the what they call the new orthodoxy of fringe Egyptology. But it does seem to be that the Serious Mystery is very much like a seminal text in this tradition. Do you want to say something maybe about like your experience with this book, but before I give like a little bit like a short rundown of what it's meant to tell us?
For sure. So, I like you, I'm a '90s kid, and I came to the Serious Mystery well after I had left my misguided and wayward, um, ufology obsessed, trying to do magic, kind of hippie youth.
Right.
And I came to Robert Temple first through a really good book that he wrote on the uses and abuses of hypnosis called Open to Suggestion, which is a really very, very paranoid, but pretty well documented and fairly well argued examination of hypnosis as a tool of crime and also like medical abuse by hypnotherapists and psychiatrists, psychologists. Really, really interesting book. And then I found out that he's written all this other stuff, like the Serious Mystery, that is just way off on the other side of the deep end. So like you point out, I've only flipped through it. But the significance of the Serious Mystery, at least in sort of in my mind, is in the impact that it's had on popularizing Sirius mythology and the position of Sirius and the notion of ancient aliens or modern aliens from Sirius as a cornerstone of some of the fringe bestsellers that came after it, particularly
Right.
people associated with Robert Anton Wilson and sort of more specifically in my wheelhouse, James Shelby Downard. So the mythology of Sirius really features prominently in both Robert Anton Wilson, other Discordians as well, and in Downard's supposed writing. A lot of that is due to Robert Temple popularizing that notion of contact between non-human intelligences from Sirius and the Dogon tribe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he really does seem to. I mean, he's quoted a lot. Like anybody who gets into this field seems to say something about like you say, the Dogon. And so, like the Dogon, I read the Conversations with Ogotomeli, an introduction to Dogon religious ideas, and this is like a small text from 1948. I found it like on a I have it like a state sponsored, like, well, no, it's not even state sponsored. It's an actual state agency in Sweden that like it has everything that's ever been recorded on an audiobook, like in Swedish. And so it even has like old cassettes where it's like it's telling you now it's time to change the cassette, and in the beginning of the audiobook it's like telling you don't listen to the cassette telling you to don't listen to the message telling you to change the cassettes, because this is a digital audiobook. And it's just like I'm like, okay, I'm in the right crowd here, like this is my kind of stuff. And so I didn't listen to all of it, like the Conversations with Diogo Temelli, and I don't think it is the first text that brings this up about the Serious Mystery, but it's not the one that I think Robert Temple like leans on, heavily. There is like a more, I think they did in the 50s, a more elaborate sort of rewriting of what they had gained from talking to this Ogotomeli. And so basically Ogotomeli was a seer or a shaman in the Dogon tribe, and they are a West African group, right? Like an indigenous sort of hunter-gatherer society, maybe doing a little bit of like natural farming, somewhat sedentary by the time that they interview them. It seems like from the way they talk about it, they have granaries and stuff. So they must have had some sort of, I don't know necessarily when it is that it's being suggested, how far back the theories about Sirius that they have, like how far back it goes. But like what's interesting about it is that, well, first off, Sirius is like it's like one of the closest stars, right? It's only like 9 light years away from Earth, and it's the second closest star to our own solar system. And so these two French anthropologists, Marcel Criaul and Germain Dietelin, they studied the Dogon for many years, and they lived with them, and little by little they got more and more like initiated into their teachings. They were allowed to talk to people who even the Dogon don't allow everybody to talk to. And what they noted was this curious feature, right? That the Dogon believed that the Sirius star was accompanied by another star of incredible heaviness, which was invisible, like it is invisible to the naked eye. And they called it Putolo, the Pu star. And, Pu in their language means tiny seed of a type of cereal known as fonio. I don't know really what that means, but it aptly encapsulates the smallness of this star. And later, like in Western astronomy, it was in fact discovered, and it is now known that Sirius is a binary star system, and that the bright star we can see from Earth has a companion, which is again invisible to the naked eye, or indeed to any but the most powerful telescopes. And the existence of Sirius B as the companion star, it was only suspected by astronomers in the first decades of the 19th century, when anomalies in Sirius movements suggested the gravitational pull of a massive celestial body nearby. And it wasn't, conclusively observed until 1842, and not photographed until 1970. So, this is, of course, what opens up the mystery about the Sirius, right? Like, how can it be that these hunter-gatherers later turned into sort of pastoral agriculturalists? How can it be that they already knew that Sirius had a twin star, right? That seems to be the kick, right? The Kickstarter of this.
Yeah, that's the sort of the nugget that Robert Temple seizes on, and then kind of spins off into everything else that he elaborates.
Yeah, and he does elaborate a lot, I guess. Like, I mean, we'll get to that in a short while. Um, I mean, I also really want to get back to, like, what you were talking about, like the initial book that you read. I didn't know that he had written about the suggestion, right? Like about hypnosis. And I've been thinking a lot about hypnosis and remote viewing in this last, few weeks in preparation for this. So we definitely have to, yeah, we have to talk about that, like, yeah, a little bit later on. But I think, yeah, so the first interesting thing, maybe then, on another level of interest, is that, like, even, yeah, it is interesting what he's saying about the Dogon. Like, it is interesting that, how can they know that there is a dwarf star connected to Sirius? But the other aspect is that, Temple's book attracted the attention of not only the American but also the British security services, as well as the Freemasons. And in 1968, when Temple decided that he wanted to study the mystery further, a man called Arthur M. Young, who we will talk a lot about, provided him with a privately made translation of these two French anthropologists' books called Renard Palais. This was, yeah, sort of one of those summarizing books of the conversations with Ogotomeli, and it became their main work on the Dogon, like their final magnum opus, sort of. And so Temple tells us how this copy was stolen from him in London by someone whom he later learned worked for the CIA. And so, presumably in an attempt to interfere with his research, or at least that's his own take, right? But the question still remains, right? Like, why would the CIA care about a book about the Dogon? Like, it's just, it seems like not fringe archaeology, even, it's like fringe anthropology. Not in that they're doing fringe, they're not suggesting very outlandish things. They're just, sort of recapturing what the Dogon are saying. But it's a very, it's a very fringe subject in terms of just general scientific anthropological interest. And so why would they care about it? And so after being harassed by the CIA, an agency which Temple, admires, the plot thickens even further when it is realized that not only, American intelligence agencies were taking an interest in the book, but Temple also discovered that one of the British security service had actually commissioned a report on it, and that the MI5 had carried out security checks on him. And so Temple also relates how he was approached then by a prominent American Freemason, Charles E. Weber, who was an old friend of his family, and who had been working in, he had been a high-ranking Freemason for generations. And discovering that Temple had discovered this book, he asked him to become a Mason. And he said the following, quote, "We are very interested in your book, The Serious Mystery. We realize you have written this without any knowledge of the traditions of Masonry, and you may not be aware of this, but you have made some discoveries which relates to the most central traditions at a high level, including some things that none of us ever knew." All right, so the reason for this might be explained later as not having, anything to do with the revelations performed by Temple or the Freemasons, or that there is necessarily something dangerous about the book, or that it contains, quote unquote, forbidden knowledge, but rather, this is at least is my theory. I haven't, I assume that you have somewhat a similar take, that rather, what made the intelligence apparatus interested in this and the Masons is that, the very person who gave him the book was this Arthur M. Young, a man with possible information about why the intelligence apparatus were suddenly interested with Temple, and the way he had, revived for the counterculture this areo-heroic storytelling of the secret societies. And, to explain why that is the case, we need to go back a little bit in time, so this book is released in the 70s. But if we go back just a little bit in time, we arrive, at the heydays of like what is all of our favorites, the topics of all topics, obviously. And it's Project Artichoke, and later the MK Ultra sub projects 58 and 136.